Now, quite obviously, this video is going to contain spoilers for Solo, a Star Wars story, so if you haven't seen it yet and don't want this movie ruined, click away now and come back after you've seen it. That being said, let's jump right in and talk about what was no doubt the biggest surprise to come out of Solo, and what it might mean for the future direction of the franchise. And that, of course, was the reveal that Maul, formerly known as Darth Maul, is the leader of the Crimson Dawn crime syndicate that was introduced in this movie. And, I thought we'd get a cool cameo or two of some kind in this movie. I would have been surprised if we didn't, but I figured it might be someone like Boba Fett or Bosk or some other bounty hunter that we know and might have a history with Han. But Maul? He was probably about the last character I ever expected, but one that got me the most excited considering what it could mean for the immediate future of the franchise and these anthology movies, especially if Boba Fett truly is the next one up. But before I get to all that speculation, let me say that I do think it was a good idea to bring Maul into this movie, despite the fact it risked confusing some people who think he died in The Phantom Menace, and well, I can't fault anyone who thinks that because he did get cut in half and fall down a pit in that movie, and if you haven't kept up with all the other sources of canon, mainly the two animated shows Clone Wars and Rebels, or just haven't heard through the grapevine that he's still alive, that had to be a bit of a head-scratching moment to see him there. But here's the thing, from my point of view at least, putting Maul in there was about the best way you could tip your hat and say thank you to the fans who do keep up with all the sources of canon beyond the movies. Because outside of, say, Ahsoka, he's probably been one of the best, most well-developed, and universally enjoyed characters from the animated shows. And considering he gets essentially no character development in The Phantom Menace, where he first showed up, and all his growth and change has been shown outside of the movies, this was a great way to acknowledge that, yes, the movies will pay heed to what goes on in the other sources of canon and bring in important characters from them, which gives hope that the aforementioned Ahsoka may show up in a live-action movie someday. And I of course know some of you will say that bringing Maul in was just blatant, unnecessary fan service, but I'd argue that it wasn't just done for a moment of fan service, but that there was very much a point and a plan to putting Maul in this movie, and that we could see him again in future movies. As I said a moment ago, he has been very, very well developed in the animated shows, and it wouldn't be hard to bring those who either don't know he was still alive, or only heard he was alive but are clueless as to how it happened, up to speed on what Maul has done since his reemergence during the Clone Wars, and then to carry that story forward. In fact, and some of you are going to hate this idea, but at the same time, it can't be denied that it works. I wouldn't be surprised if Lucasfilm adopts the MCU model to some extent and makes Maul an overarching villain in the next couple anthology movies. Rumor has it that Boba Fett will be the next movie, and if it takes place shortly after Solo on the timeline, it wouldn't be hard to have Maul hire Boba Fett for some purpose, and to also include characters such as Han, Lando, qi'ra, and others who were in Solo, making it like a continuation of Solo, yet also its own thing, not completely unlike how the MCU operates. There are then a lot of different directions it could go after that, including a direct sequel to Solo, or a Lando movie, or an actual Maul movie that could encompass different time periods of his life, starting with how he was taken by Darth Sidious at a young age, and then what his training was like under him, all the way up to how Maul created the Crimson Dawn, and my guess is his purpose or ultimate goal is to topple the Empire from within, since we know from other sources of canon Maul still harbors a great deal of hatred for Sidious. Not to mention, it would be fitting for Maul to attempt such a thing considering it's basically how Sidious took over the Republic in the first place, corrupting it from within. There's also the opportunity here for another confrontation between Maul and Sidious, and they duel in the Clone Wars if you don't know, or for Maul to take on Darth Vader. And yeah, these sound like straight up fan service duels, but honestly, I really don't care if it means seeing Vader versus Maul. There's also the opportunity to learn more about Darth Plagueis in such a movie because during Maul's younger days, if how it played out in the expanded universe holds true, Sidious was training Maul while still an apprentice to Plagueis. All of this then can answer the questions of how and why, in the show Rebels, we found Maul on Malachor at the site of an ancient Sith temple that is actually a giant weapon, and that's because Crimson Dawn was no doubt stopped in some capacity by Sidious, which is basically what happened to Maul's first crime syndicate called the Shadow Collective that he created during the Clone Wars, and after a second failed attempt to defeat Sidious at his own game, he now seeks a weapon to just destroy him and his empire. And yes, I'm probably having delusions of grandeur here, but I really don't think they stuck Maul into Solo just for one quick fan service moment. I think they do have a plan and a purpose, though that plan might be derailed if Solo isn't a hit both financially and with the fans. And right now at least, both those questions are very much up in the air. Which means I'd guess any plans to carry this storyline started in Solo forward, at least in the films, is also very much up in the air. Though I have no doubt it'll play out somewhere, such as novels or comics, if it never makes it into the films. There's also the unfortunate problem of already knowing how Maul's story is ultimately going to end, and that is being killed by Obi-Wan on Tatooine in the show Rebels. And to contradict or change his final fate shown in that show would kind of defeat the whole purpose here of giving credence to the other sources of canon. Though I don't think it'd be impossible, if done right, to show that fight again in the Obi-Wan anthology movie, as long as it basically goes beat for beat to how it played out in Rebels. There's also another problem with all of this. It wouldn't do much to expand the universe, and it would essentially beat the dead horse that is the time period around the original trilogy. Nevertheless, we also know that there is a whole other trilogy in the works right now, going to be brought to us by Rian Johnson, that is supposed to take place in a different time and place than anything we've ever seen before. There's also a series of movies that will be done by the guys who have worked on Game of Thrones for HBO, not to mention a live-action TV series that will premiere on Disney's streaming service. And all of that could be either good news or bad news for the possibility of a Maul story unfolding on the big screen. In one respect, there is plenty of other content that will take place away from this time period of the original trilogy, offering fresh, new stories and characters for people who desperately want it. In another respect, though, having multiple different stories essentially taking place at the same time, totally separate from each other, is probably going to lead to confusion amongst the more casual fans. One of the strengths of the MCU, for example, for more casual fans, is that it's very linear and easy to understand that, more often than not, the next movie to come out is taking place after the previous movie in the timeline. And to offer up my best guess here, I think there's a very good reason why no other anthology movie has been officially announced by Lucasfilm, yet two are rumored, those being Obi-Wan and Boba Fett. And that's because the success or failure of Solo is going to very much dictate the future of Star Wars movies. If Solo is a success and people clamor for more of this young Han and or this storyline, then don't be surprised if we get confirmation, and soon, on some of these rumored projects, like the Boba Fett movie, which will also be promised to include Han, not to mention, though they may not outright say this, carry on this overarching story about the Crimson Dawn and Darth Maul. Yet if Solo is a failure, I wouldn't be surprised if Rogue One and Solo are the first and last of their kind, at least for now, and that the focus doesn't turn entirely on what Rian Johnson and the writers of Game of Thrones on HBO have in store for us. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Would you like to see the storyline started in Solo expanded upon? Or is it just time to move away entirely from the time period of the original trilogy? Also, what do you think of Maul getting an anthology movie? Is that something you'd like to see? Or is it something you could never see them actually doing? Let me know in the comments below what you think, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.